gorgeous visuals oozing with an atmosphere that feels lived in, an incredible soundtrack that sounds a lot like Blade Runner, and the gameplay of a frenetic top-down shooter with a hint of RPG elements thrown in. Aside from a few bugs here and there, I'd say that the Ascent should be a must-play for anyone that wanted a cyberpunk game that actually felt like cyberpunk. But even more than that, it also has a Mass Effect vibe to it as well, with all of these alien creatures living in semi-harmony with each other. You really want to get into this world and dig deep into the lore and everything that it has to offer. But after a little while, it becomes apparent that the game is more for the looks than for its deep gameplay. And that's not to say that's a bad thing, but if you were expecting an RPG, you might be disappointed. This is a lot more of an open world action game than an RPG. It's your basic level up system, where you get stronger and can replace the weapons and armors for better stats. You know, the usual. It's a very simple game and feels like something that could have come out on the PS1 if the PS1 had the power to run it. But the combat is really fun, although repetitive with the same enemy types that spawn out of nowhere to block your path. They explain it away by saying that you're running through different gang territories, but it can get stale, especially when it takes a while before you can find new weapons and abilities to use. It can get tedious using the same 2 pistols and assault rifle that you've been using for a few hours. You also get augments to your character that add to your arsenal, like being able to hack turrets to shoot enemies, or being able to hack health and ammo kiosks to self-destruct. And more augments, like a cybernetic arm implant that can melee a few enemies in one hit. You also get skill sets that adds different types of grenades to your kit, or you can even change how your character behaves in combat. Like you could get better health, but it will reduce your speed in combat, stuff like that. The cover system though can be tricky to pull off, since it's not automatic and you have to press B to hide behind anything. And it won't automatically shoot above cover, you have to press L1 instead. In the heat of battle, you might end up stumbling with the controls instead of shooting enemies, and sometimes there's no point in being behind cover, since the enemies will just run at you, forcing you to back away from cover anyway. Although I feel like the game has a serious problem with how it ramps up the difficulty, even when you're leveling up normally. And a lot of the difficulty stems from enemies that spawn behind you in paths that you thought were cleared out, and just wave after wave of never-ending enemies that take your bullets like a sponge takes water. It was definitely exciting at first, but after the 3rd or 4th time trying to get past the section, you'll start calling it bullshit. Especially if the game glitches on you and sends you 5 giant feral bruisers at you at once, throwing rockets at you from their backs. This is a game that you may want to grind, so you won't feel overwhelmed by the next mission's enemies. Even upgrading everything, which can be difficult because money is scarce, you'll have to sell weapons as often as you can. The game drops a lot of doubles that are useless, other than for raising money to upgrade the weapon that you have. And when the game's story starts off very slowly, with odd jobs and missions here and there, the fun factor of the combat can wane a bit, since it's a lot of the same enemies over and over. And when a new boss shows up, it can feel exciting and disappointing when you realize that you aren't as equipped as you thought you were. When you reach that spider robot that has a flamethrower, you'll know what I mean. It's doable, but it can get extremely frustrating. Luckily, if you're having trouble, you can lower the difficulty on the fly. But even then, prepare for a challenge. So that's the basics of combat. But how's the story? It's okay so far, nothing super serious, as you play as a bounty hunter running odd jobs and missions for people, all the while unraveling why the Ascent Corporation shut down. The cast of characters are really well acted, and they really feel like they're in the scene, not like actors rehearsing their lines. I kept comparing these scenes to Mass Effect and Cyberpunk 2077. While the story is nowhere near as deep as Mass Effect, the acting is much better, and I feel like this game does the cyberpunk genre more justice than Cyberpunk 2077. Even the dialogue choices, where you're just asking more questions to learn about the world, are straight to the point and so well acted that you won't be bored listening to it all. And you won't want to just skip it because you know it adds to the world building, and it's not just an overly drawn out paragraph of text that the actor slogs their way through. I still had trouble understanding what the heck was going on most of the time, but that was mainly due to their extremely thick accents. And this may be an expertly crafted cyberpunk game, it definitely feels a little different, Not like an American cyberpunk, more like French or Australian cyberpunk. Even if the cast has multiple accents and languages, it feels like a foreign film. It's hard to describe it, but that just may be me, and you may not even get the sense of that at all. The soundtrack is the real star of the show, even ahead of the incredible graphics. More so than anything, the music brings you into the world, ever changing depending on your situation. Calm techno vibes when you're running through a city crowd, and fast, thumping beats when you're engaged with the enemy. The music, I think, feels the most like Blade Runner, and you can tell Blade Runner was the main inspiration for this game, right down to the certain iconic buildings and streets from the film, to the police cars that fly around through the city. They're very similar to the ones in Blade Runner, and any cyberpunk fan is going to be in for a real treat with this game. Graphically, the game is running on Unreal Engine 4, and with that comes all the technical hiccups of an Unreal Engine game. Pop in, load in, characters not in their place, and snap into position suddenly like they weren't ready for their close-up. This happens a few times, and not during major cutscenes, but it's jarring when it does happen, because everything else looks so detailed and perfect when it's fully loaded in. And there are some audio glitches at the title screen, but that's the only time I've noticed that. I'm playing the Ascent on the Series X, and I gotta say it runs very well. Aside from a few frame drops when you reach a new area of the map, mostly 60 frames per second throughout. But even though the game looks incredible and really next gen, it honestly isn't, and I'm so disappointed that the game doesn't feature ray tracing on the Series X, as that was one of the biggest features I was looking forward to. It has ray tracing on the PC version, so if you're able to run it with ray tracing on, enjoy it. But from what I've seen, the ray tracing looks much better than the screen space reflections. Although with how good the game looks already, I don't think I'll be missing the ray tracing too much. Hopefully the developers can figure something out and get it to work on the Series X. I don't really need to run this game at 4K if I can have ray tracing enabled. As far as people who still have a regular Xbox One or One X, the game should run at around 30 frames per second and still be an enjoyable experience, albeit with much longer load times. So if you were disappointed in recent cyberpunk games lately, and you like top-down shooters, albeit slightly repetitive and sometimes frustratingly difficult, then getting the Ascent should be an easy decision, especially since its price is set so reasonably at $30. This is definitely a game to check out.